Welcome to this episode of The World of Big Ideas. We're very fortunate to be broadcasting live in London. We are at the Hippodrome Casino, and my God, are we going to get into it today. I am joined by my first panel of esteemed guests that I'm looking forward to picking your brains on, and I'm going to start all the way on my right-hand side. I got to ask, how you doing, Rob?
Pick on the Irishman.
Yeah, pick on the Irishman.
The only Irishman here. Tell
us why are the Irish here?
We've a strong relationship with the United States. We're curious in nature. We're great speakers. And we love advocating for many different topics. And this topic is really, it really speaks to us.
Well, I'm really glad that you're here. Next to my right is Dan. How are you feeling today, Dan? If you want to give us a bit of an introduction into, what's your name? Where'd you come from?
So my name is Dan. Daniel, if I'm in trouble. I'm from Wales. This almost feels like a joke. An Irishman, a Welshman, an American, and an Englishman walk into a bar. Yeah, so I'm from Wales, the land of mythology and fairies and all that jazz. People will know me from that UFO podcast where I co-host The Breakdown and the forthcoming show What It Means to Be Human. And I'm really here to kind of find out what this phenomenon means in terms of what it means to be human when it makes us reflect and hold up a mirror and think about how it's going to transform us going forward. Where the ball's going to be rather than where the ball is right now.
I love that. To my left, I have the main man, Mr. Luis Elizondo. How are you feeling today, Lou? Are you ready to get into it with me again?
I'm in London. I'm feeling fantastic. You can never have a bad day here, surrounded by some great friends and colleagues of mine. There's a lot of folks you can't see on camera, but they're off stage that are also joining us. Some of these folks are very well-known people in this community, so and they will be throwing in questions as well and being participating in this as well. How'd I get here? Well, usually when like a man and a woman love each other.
Yeah, we're going to go there.
That's a different conversation.
All the way on the far left, we've got Vinnie Adams. How are you feeling today? What are you going to be throwing into the mixer on this fine morning?
I'm feeling good, thank you. What am I going to throw in? We've got a lot to talk about. There's always a lot of subjects that we can cover. I want to come at it from a bit of a historical angle. Mm-hmm. There's things happening right now in this country, but we've seen this happen many, many times. Now, do we know what they are? Do we know if they're UAP, if they're drones? We'll get into that, but I always want to say, look, this is not something new. This has been happening for a long time. It's not a US phenomenon. It's not a UK phenomenon. It's a global phenomenon, and yeah, looking forward to it.
Well, I actually want to start with you, if you don't mind me. See, I'm not just picking on the
Well,
Irish.
first of all, we got to start with you. We all went through this, but now you're not getting off that easy, Mark. You got to tell us about you.
Well, as you know, I think I'm coming at this angle from the consistent and persistent skeptic. And the thing is, the longer I've known you, the harder and harder it's becoming to remain skeptical. For those of you who might not have seen previous episodes, I was brought onto this topic by my brother. It was really weird. I ran into Lou in a pub in London, just around the corner from here. And I think the angle I come from is I just need to see facts and truth. And I think until I can see it, feel it, touch it with my own eyes, this is always going to be a mystery to me. I get very confused why, if things are being classified, why the evidence behind it is not being shown. On one hand, we get to talk about things. On the other hand, we can't show proof of it. And that's what I'm here to navigate. I'm here to be, I hope, a helpful skeptic. And I've got to ask, if we start from your end, Vinny, we were talking before we rocked up about it's hard to be skeptical when things are landing on runways in Manchester. Like right now, this week is the first time I've seen this topic covered on major news broadcasts. It's on the radio. I hear people talking about it every day. You had a bit of insight into this story, especially as you look at it historically. What do you think about the incursions happening right now in the UK as we record this podcast?
It's strange because it's been happening on a daily basis for over a week. We've had F-15s up in the air trying to go after these things. That's not normal for going after a drone. That's a safety of flight issue there. I think it throws up more questions than it does answers, because why are these things being allowed to continue on a day-to-day basis? What about all this anti-drone technology that we've got? It begs so many questions. Can anybody just fly a drone over a military base now? Is that what they're allowing?
Well, for those who don't know, could you give an example? Could you give like a timeline of what has been happening for those who haven't heard about this yet?
Yes, I'm sure it was just over a week ago we started having reports of drones over RAF US Air Force bases here in the UK. Nobody knew what they were. Very little information was coming out of the media. It seems the MOD doesn't really want to talk about it. And so we're getting lots of pieces of information by people that are there, the public, who are filming these things, who are talking about it on forums, on Facebook. And so we're getting like fragmented bits of information. But something needs to be done. It needs to, I don't want to come here and say this is UAP, but we don't know what they are exactly.
You've got some insight though, Dan, haven't you?
Yeah, so you mentioned Manchester there, and recently over the last few days, someone posted to social media a video of what they describe as UAP kind of floating in the air against how the wind was blowing and landing on the tarmac at Manchester Airport. And I've been fortunate enough to speak to the gentleman who posted them, who was reluctant to post the source images on social media because there's metadata attached where it can identify who took it, what time it was taken, and things like that. And it's been interesting kind of seeing the reaction to him posting this, because everyone's kind of, with this drone incursion going on over Lakenheath, which is near Rendlesham, FYI, where, there's a historical site and nuclear materials related. People have kind of conflated the two events, thinking that, there's been posts on social media saying that these Manchester images come from this week and the airport was shut down and so on and so forth. And I can't really say the date because the gentleman who gave me the photos was...
Are we getting to I can't really say already? What do you mean
yeah,
you can't
already,
say? What
already.
What do you mean you can't say the date?
So
Welcome to my world, by the way.
So we kind of have to respect the sources in terms of sensitivity, because there's still a stigma attached to these things. Pilots could lose their jobs if they're posting videos from inside the cockpits and things like that. So the source is wary of posting the images with the metadata, because if you can say, okay, the planes were on the runway at this time on this date, they can figure out who the pilot is. And there's repercussions that come with that may or may not be related to UAP. It might just be like, don't post things from inside the cockpit and things like that. But also, people think that people that post UAP stuff are crazy in a way.
But just to needle on that a little bit, so you have footage of that event that you're not allowed to show. Is that what I'm reading in there?
Yes, exactly. So I've been sent the source images and the source video of this event with the attached metadata.
Right.
So I can attest that it's real. It's not Photoshop, as I've read online.
Can we see it now? Can you?
I can't, because
cool.
I've promised the source that I won't, because it possibly gives someone away and could affect someone's life in a negative manner. So I have to be sensitive with that. Lou put it really well before, where he said, you don't build trust by breaking trust. So I have to be really conscious of the sensitivity of these things. But I can confirm that the Manchester event was actually months ago. It wasn't now. It's not to be conflated with the current drone incursions. It's a separate thing, but it's still really interesting.
It's in many respects good we're getting to this point already. Because my position, and me and Lou have had this conversation before, for many who listen and they get exposed to this subject, they very quickly hit a point where someone goes, I've got this information, but I can't tell you.
I can talk to you in a skiff.
Okay, so before we move on to that, this stuff that you have, so you have information or source images from these incursions that have been happening. Is there a plan to release that to people? Are you having a conversation with your source to say, how do we get this out, and do you feel confident that this information will be released in the near future?
Yeah, absolutely. There's
Cool,
a plan
great,
to get it out.
cool.
And the conversation is about, look, this is what data I can discern from what you've given me. The source has given me permission to pass these images on to Lou, where they can be treated with sensitivity, and he knows they'll be treated with sensitivity. But what information I can release to the public is an ongoing conversation. So, I just said vaguely, it was months ago. I can't even say the date.
Understood.
Because that jeopardizes somebody's job. And that speaks to the fact there's still stigma attached to this topic, even though we're talking about it in Congress. For 50, 60 years, we never had a hearing. And now in 2 years, we've had 3, 4. That's incredible. But we're still not quite there yet. And it speaks to why we need these hearings to happen.
So the process like this, someone finds some information or source footage which is clearly delicate, and it clearly represents something that is of a security issue, let's say, it flows through the correct channels. And I've always loved the way you explain about doing things right and not right now. How does it work when stuff like this gets put through the correct channels, and how does it feel for you? Can you show us?
Well, no, because exactly as Dan said, we have to protect the source. There are still repercussions and potential reprisal for people coming forward and circumventing the proper channel. Now, in this case, there isn't a proper channel that's been established yet, so that makes it increasingly more frustrating because a lot of people that come to me want to tell the truth and they want to provide information, and there's no established official channels to do it. And then what happens is if it goes through unofficial channels, i.e. me, and I violate their trust, all of a sudden they get exposed and there are negative repercussions. And so I can't tell you how many times people like us have been entrusted by other people, third parties, to protect their information. And it is frustrating because in some cases you have something very, very compelling. But because of that bond and that trust you have with that individual, you can't violate it. And it's very much like journalistic integrity, right? You never burn a source no matter what. In fact, you're willing to go to jail to protect them. And I appreciate that because I feel the same way as a former intelligence officer with sources that I was working with, human sources. Their lives potentially are in jeopardy. If they get caught talking to you, in some cases, it's called espionage. It's called spying. And in some cases, people have been killed. Now, I'm not saying this is the case with these individuals. They're probably not going to get killed, but they could lose their jobs, or they could be stigmatized to the point where now, certain companies don't want to employ them anymore. And that has happened. We've seen that over and over again, especially in the civilian world of commercial air travel, right? So commercial pilots, you're starting to see some openness now, a little bit more. But I'll tell you, even in our country right now, the FAA doesn't have any prescribed procedures yet for civilian pilots to report UAP information. Now, wait a minute. It's been how many years? And we keep hearing, we're going to have these channels established. Well, where are they? It's not Aero. Aero is more focused on governmental type stuff, military and intelligence. They say, we get involved in some civilian stuff, but not really. They don't have that authority. They're Title 50 and Title 10, but they don't have the civilian authorities. That's FAA. That's Department of Homeland Security. That's DHS. I don't care what anybody says. DOD can come in all day long and say, well, we have the authorities to do this. No, you don't. And so until those other organizations like FAA get involved, it's up to these guys to triage that information, validate it, make sure it's legit, and then at that point, decide what's the best course of action. How do you handle that information in a way that increases transparency, facilitates transparency, but still protects the source and the source information?
Well, Vinnie, there's a lot of nodding going on when Lou was going through that. You've got some experience in this.
Very much so. I've had pilots approach me, commercial pilots, in their jobs, and they're scared, but they want the information out. This is the thing. So they come to people like me, Dan, Rob, even, they want to build relationships. They want to see who you are as a person first. Can I trust this guy? How is he going to handle the information? And what's going to happen to me after we do bring this out? And so I've been through that a few times, and it makes you understand that these relationships are vitally important to build that trust. Because the minute, like you said, the minute you burn a source, you're done. No one's going to trust you again. No one's going to come to you with anything.
I think, just to jump on, I think you just got to look back at David Grush's background, similar to you, Lou. You served your country, you did your job, you're protecting your country at the same time. There's mechanisms that's stopping you from doing it. There's a process that isn't there. Sorry, there's a process that isn't there. So David is autistic, and David got ridiculed for his autism, for speaking up about something that's a national security issue, by being an advocate for people who don't have the mechanism to advocate for themselves. Now, we're not...
Rob, can you talk a little bit? This is very
Sure.
important. Can you talk a little bit about your background, your expertise, specifically as it relates to
my
spectrum and autism?
Yes.
Because I think this is relevant.
So I've worked in the disability sector for years, and I don't like coining autism as disability, but unfortunately it is. It's a neurodiverse pathway, looking at the world differently. But yeah, I mean, I've worked with individuals in professional capacity and organizations within a specific consultancy capacity around neurodiversity. And people looked at David and they said, look, he's got trauma and he was this, that, and the other. He drank an awful lot. I mean, autistic people digest trauma very, very differently intrinsically to anybody else. And we all deal with trauma and grief in very different ways. I mean, David lost a friend who was killed in front of him. David lost another friend who hung himself, or not hung himself, sorry, he shot himself. Like, that's traumatic. But he served his country. And he was ridiculed for speaking up about something that is a national security issue. And as you said, Vinnie, historically, this has been set up to create stigma. It's been set up for people to jump on the bandwagon and to stigmatize people. That's wrong. I mean, we're here talking about non-human intelligence. We should be really talking about the human story in this and what it means. And look at our own cultures and look at how we support people, or lack of support in organizations that are entrusted by the goodwill of the taxpayer. And that needs to change. And that annoys me. And that's the reason why I'm involved in this. And it annoyed me when David got, kicked down for speaking up. Because that was the bravest thing I've ever seen. He lost his job. He lost his career.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did.
Yeah. And look, I've got a master's, 2 degrees, and a H diploma. If I lost my job tomorrow in the work that I'm so passionate about, I'd have a nervous breakdown. I'd be pissed. So we need to look at that. We need to look at the sacrifice that Lou made, what he's done. People are calling him this, that, and the other. He left his job, GS-15 role with a family and 2 kids. He has to protect himself. I know the stress that he's under. I speak to his wife almost nearly every day, and I speak to Lou almost every day. I speak to Vinnie and other guys, and I'm speaking to other people in the military. There's a lot to contend with. It's wrong, and it has to stop. And this conversation has to be about the human element as well, and to change the culture of how we view other people that are actually making a change. It's the innovators, the people that are willing to speak up to be leaders, are making the change.
If we may, for a minute, you bring up a great point about the personal impact, and we've known each other long enough that, likewise, I've seen some pretty horrendous moments that you've had to go through, not just you, your family, your kids. Can you give us like a personal sentiment of what is it that makes you keep going despite all of these stones that get thrown at you? Like, how's it feeling for you and what you've been through specifically?
It's super easy to describe. What gets me through is this right here. This is living proof of this is what gets me through. This is what gets my family through, because they know it's important. They lived through the reality of the program that I was part of, ATIP, and they are now seeing this huge groundswell of support and individuals who are coming forward and saying, hey, you know what? You're right. That's wrong, the way you were treated. And I had it easy. And a lot of people say, oh, it was horrible what you went through. And yeah, you know what? It wasn't fun. But there's a lot of people like Dave Grush who had to go through a lot worse than I did as far as repercussions. Within 24 hours, they tried to bury his career. And, love him or hate him, irrelevant. He is a patriot. And I worked with him at U.S. Space Force. I wasn't allowed to say where, but at this point, I don't care anymore, because people are like, oh, well, he didn't really. Yes, he did. We worked in his SAP-F facility, a SCIF together, and our only job was UAP. And no one knows that. And I'll tell you right here and right now, for the first time, that's exactly what we were working on, and Space Force was paying us to do it. And this was after ATIP. So when people are saying, oh, well, there wasn't anything to see here, that's not true. And in fact, some of the most compelling data that we have right now in the U.S. government was a result of our time at Space Force, not at ATIP, because we had better technology, more capabilities, more persistence. I'm hopeful that story will be told sometime, because people like Dave, I hate talking about myself. I do suffer a little bit from imposter syndrome, because I know a lot of people had a lot worse than me. So I don't want to be the poster child of, victimization. I don't look at victimization as a virtue. I look at it as a challenge that we all have to overcome as human beings, part of the human experience, right? I try to avoid it when possible.
Well, I guess for some context for people listening, trying to fill the blanks, I mean, the kind of threats that you have been under have been about as bad as they get in terms of threats to your safety and things like that. And that context, I think, is important of what you go through, because as I look at this subject and I see the steps on the ladder getting higher, and then there's more footage, and there's more events, and then the radio stations talk about it, the media, the airports are closed. What seems to be happening is, why do you think that people are short-sighted enough to think that this is a game to be suppressed? If you're going to try and drag people's names through coals, threaten them, perhaps physically or professionally, why would they keep doing that to suppress a story that is clearly gaining infallible momentum?
Let me give you a real example, if that's okay, rather than just hypotheticals. And I can't speak for other governments, and I really can't even speak for the U.S. government. I can only speak from my point of experience working with the U.S. government. There are many, many examples where we, as my government, has kept things secret. One of those reasons is to keep our secrets from out of the hands of our adversaries, like Russia and China. We don't want to give away certain, not only what we have, but more importantly, maybe our intelligence gaps, what we don't have, right? And what those key vulnerabilities are. But then there are circumstances where we will keep information classified, not because we're worried about our adversaries, but we keep it away from our own people. Now that sounds kind of crazy, but in reality, there's many examples of that. So let me give you a few of those. The Manhattan Project, back in World War II, we built this capability, this atomic bomb in total secrecy. And in fact, some of the secrets were so important that we were, during the case and the trial against the Rosenbergs, it's highly likely that somebody paid the ultimate price who really wasn't even involved in compromising a national secret, believe it or not. I won't go into detail on that, but there's other examples. For example, another program I was part of with, I could talk about this now, I think, was the renditions, detentions, and interrogations program. It wasn't until Congress found out what we were doing was there any type of oversight. People had no idea. You mean we are shipping terrorists from country X to country Y to country Z and then bring them to Guantanamo Bay, and we're interrogating, we're doing all this other stuff. All that was kept quiet from the American people because some of it probably would have offended some people. And it did, rightfully so. And it also offended members of Congress, right? There's examples over and over again. You can look at, why are the JFK files still classified? It's been damn near 70 years. What good? Those people who were involved are now dead. And yet we still keep it classified. Why? Well, because there's data points in there. And by the way, for the record, I don't agree with this practice, that are either embarrassing or maybe inconvenient or cast the U.S. maybe in some sort of negative light. It's not that unusual. We do it all the time. CIA black sites is another example. There's a long history. The use of CIA and using LSD and giving it to civilians, right? How did that get exposed? Well, it wasn't because of a leak. A leak is what exposed it. Forgive me, I don't mean to ramble here, but there's a long litany of examples. And where we are now in this topic with UAPs, the U.S. government has spent so much time and resources lying to the American public. Let me say the U.S. government. Let me go back. Elements within the U.S. government have invested a lot of time and resources creating this artificial sense of stigma and taboo that now it's really hard to back yourself out of the corner. So now we have a situation on our hands. Okay, what do we do? Do we go full open kimono, knowing that people are probably going to get in a lot of trouble and there's going to be some significant consequences to this? Or do we continue to say, you know what? I've got about 3 more years before I retire. Let's just push this conversation till after I retire. Let's kick the ball down the road a little bit. Let's just be somebody else's problem, not my problem.
Well, I keep seeing Dan grab his mic, so I know you got some stuff to throw in here.
Yeah, I wanted to bounce off what Lou's saying there with something that irks me in the conversation that the U.S. government is having or not having with people is that they're leaving these information gaps. And we constantly hear from the DOD that they're not happy with the conspiracy theories, with the extraterrestrial talk and things like that. And yet they're happy to leave these information gaps that people just put fantasies into, right? And it's like, well, if you don't want these fantasies to happen, treat us like goddamn adults and have the conversation. It's really frustrating. And then to see Susan Go, the psychological warfare officer from the Pentagon, who is the main spokesperson for this subject from the DOD, sat behind the new director of Arrow, John Kozlowski, in the hearing, giving him side-eye. The image is so weird. If they don't want the conspiracy theories to happen, why in God's name are they feeding it constantly?
And I agree with you, because there's a saying, conspiracy is born out of the lack of data. And to speak to what Lou was saying there, I mean, Susan, if you're watching this from a PR perspective, you're doing a terrible job. Because if hobbyists can fly over the most powerful military in the United States, hobbyists, I would be more inclined to worry about your capabilities than if it was an other. Because if it was another, I digest that easily. Okay, more advanced, that's fine, I get it. But I have no sympathy for your PR. It's brutal. Because if it's a hobbyist flying over an Air Force base, come on, lads.
Yeah, that's gross incompetence, isn't it? At
Correct.
that point, you're talking criminal. And like, look, not only should you be fired, but you should be prosecuted for allowing this to happen, allowing it to perpetuate day after day, month after month, year after year, and decade after decade.
Taxpayers' money.
That's right.
And what does it look like at its worst? You know, like if we think about, okay, to stage an attack on American soil, it would cost an adversary X amount. That cost has dropped exponentially with the introduction of these kinds of technology. Not to get really dark, but what does 9/11 look like? And how much effort does it take if you're sending over a platform that can drop a bunch of drones, that have a bunch of bombs? Like, the whole New York City disappears. And we all remember 9/11. Like, everyone remembers, where were you when the towers were hit, right? It was a humbling, somber time for everyone on this planet. And to think that the DOD and the MOD and everywhere else that these incursions are happening are just fine with these overflights over their sensitive facilities, it's insanity.
I'm no military guy, but I'm very interested in behavior. So whether these things are domestic or not, and because of reporting bias out of the United States, we're seeing more of them, but they are more prevalent. We have to understand or really appreciate what's the behavior here. Because drone is the right terminology. It just depends on where it's coming from. I mean, the drone by nature is a surveillance piece of machinery that gets sent in to do a job, collect, and it's out of there. These are drones. Where are they coming from? And why are they here? We need to be asking these questions.
Here's a question that I'll ask kind of everyone on the panel here. If I come at this from the angle of going, okay, there's all of these incursions, it's getting to the point that the public are worried, you can't hide it anymore, there's too much happening. So eventually pressure gets to like a fever pitch and they go, let's go to Congress and we're going to have people testify, they're going to go under oath and they're going to be sworn to tell the truth. There's kind of two questions I want to pose. Number one, why do you think people would declassify the ability to talk about something, yet keep the evidence classified? I feel like that's pointless. So let's start there before I go on the second one. Why do you think that's the case? Why do you think we'd put someone on the stand and go, tell the truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God, and then put you in a position where you're not allowed to talk about?
Well, the first thing is, are the public worried? I don't think they are. I think the military-industrial complex are worried and should be worried. And that's the reason why they're not really talking about this. But Lou, I don't know whether you can speak to that question in terms of give a little takeaway.
Why do you think they would declassify you to be able to talk about this stuff anyway? What do you think the purpose is there?
Well, there are legitimate reasons to protect sources and methods. When you collect information, for example, if I say, you know what, I had a soda pop in this glass, that's different than saying I had a specific brand of soda pop that was made at this particular factory under these circumstances, and here is the secret ingredient, for example, to Coca-Cola, right? Mm-hmm. There's a reason why Coca-Cola keeps its secret on how you make it, yet everybody can buy it. Anybody can go out and buy soda pop and drink it, but how that soda is made is proprietary information, right? And so from a national security perspective, it's not unusual to say, for example, North Korea has nuclear capabilities and ICBMs. Okay, we've reported that in the media. And the government, our government, United States, has said, yeah, that's true. Now, where they're pointed at, how they work, how long it takes for them to get from point A to point B, what their trajectory and telemetry is, and how their guidance system, that you're not going to hear because that is classified, because we don't want to tip our hands necessarily that we know it, or in worst case, maybe we don't know, right? So it goes back to both what we know and the gaps and the vulnerabilities. So I can appreciate that. It is frustrating for people like me when you are under oath and someone asks you a direct question and you have to say, look, I can tell you in a closed session.
And that kind of brings me on to the second part of the question I was going to ask. Why put people under oath, that whether it's the American public, definitely from the UK, right, where we don't really understand your system and you've got like these different bodies in the government, we're not quite as close to it. But when we see someone taken up to the stand under, I guess, penalty of perjury, where they go, hey, the taxpayers and everyone in our nation are putting you on camera to be like, we need to know the truth about this. So I find it really confusing when you still get back into this corner of going, I can only talk about that in a closed environment, and why do they play that game? Like why? Right. And what needs to happen for you to be able to just open kimono it?
So the legislative branch doesn't necessarily. It's a separate branch of government in our system to our executive branch. So the legislative branch, these folks make the laws and they pay the bills. The executive branch executes those laws, and our judicial branch makes sure those laws are constitutional. The legislative branch doesn't necessarily know what is classified that the executive branch classifies. In fact, there's a separation between those two. The legislative branch can't just say, well, I'm in the legislative branch, so therefore you have to tell me everything. There are still security classification requirements, and people that have a quote unquote need to know in Congress may not have a complete need to know. Now they'll tell you otherwise. Say, well, I'm on the oversight committee, I should know everything. But the executive branch are the ones who manages those security clearances, and they will tell you over and over again, you don't tell them. So we have specific bodies in our Congress, like, for example, people here like the Gang of Six and Gang of Eight and whatnot, even the Gang of Four. People that have a need to know. These are people like on the Senate Select Committee for Intelligence, and the same thing on the House side. But not everybody in Congress has the commensurate level security clearance. So when Congress says, we want you to be open and truthful and tell us everything you know, you can't, because my security clearance is held under the executive branch. And they're the ones that are going to come after me, not the legislative branch. So it's this delicate dance. You have to look at them and say, look, I want to tell you everything, but because you don't have the right security clearance, or we're not in the right facility, or we've got, 10 million people watching live right now this hearing, I am not at liberty to give you those details over, this particular format. And it does put people like us in a really bad situation, people like Dave Grush and myself and Admiral Gallaudet, because we know a lot more, but we're just not allowed, we're not permitted to have that conversation openly. That's why you'll notice a lot of times during my testimony, I say, I'll tell you in a closed session. I'll tell you in a closed session. Because I cannot have that conversation publicly.
I think one of the excuse me. I think one of the things to point out as well is that there is a known overclassification within this subject. Just Absolutely. Look at Christopher Mellon. It repeatedly highlights this, because it shouldn't be. There should be certain pieces of information that are classified that should not be classified.
That's correct.
Because they could be out in the public domain without revealing sources and methods, without jeopardizing national security. So I think that's really important to point out.
There's definitely an abuse of the classification system for sure.
Yeah, and I think what you guys are speaking to is the UAP classification guide.
Yes.
So if these don't exist and these aren't real, why have a classification guide to protect them? And, we talked about sources and methods, and we talked about location, because you could have a United States base somewhere in Europe and something flies over it and it's classified. But if something flies over domestic airspace, it's going to be shut down. There's no sources and methods or location that should be classified, depending on the situation. But the UAP in of itself is classified. They did that for a reason.
Yeah. These things can be sanitized.
100%.
These videos can be sanitized, but they're not being sanitized and released to the public. Why not?
When you say sanitized, can you just...
Yeah, so, you get a military capability, like a forward-looking infrared camera filming a UAP. It's got a lot of data on the screen that will highlight certain capabilities that we maybe don't want an adversary to see that we've got, or it's sensitive. But you can remove all of that. You can remove
redaction. You can redact it.
You can redact it off the video.
You can strip the metadata for sure.
Strip the metadata.
And we see it often, right? Like, we'll see on the BBC
all the time.
Videos of just in the last 24 hours, a Russian jet flew close to the American border and, just was where it wasn't meant to be. And that video will be released, and it'll be HD footage from the cockpit of the plane, and they don't care about that, yet they're not releasing the UAP stuff. And there was a phrase you mentioned a second ago, which was need to know. And I think a lot of people kind of hook on this, because who has a need to know what, right? So as the public, what do we have a need to know? As the Gang of Eight, what do they have a need to know? And this is at the heart of the issue for Congress, where according to legislation, according to the Constitution, there are people in Congress that legally should know, and they do not. And that is literally criminal according to the founding laws of the land. And this is what we're fighting for, right?
I could not agree more. That is my concern. There are people in our government, maybe not the general public, but certainly in our government, that have an established need to know by law. And someone is making the unilateral decision somewhere to not tell them. To include, by the way, even some presidents. Think about that for a minute. Someone in middle management saying is, no, you know what? I'm not going to inform Congress, and I'm not going to inform the president, and I'm allowed to make that decision. No, you're not. No, you're not. You may think you do, but no, you're not. And when that comes out, you're going to have to atone for that. You're going to have to sit there and look them in the eye and say why you decided and under what authority that you've imagined that you have that ability to not inform the senior executive for the executive branch and the members of Congress who have a need to know.
Is that the case that's happening
yeah.
right now?
It is absolutely happening.
100%.
And this might be a dumb question, forgive me, but if that's happening right now, where is the quick reaction and prosecution of that illegal move? Because surely you sit down and you go, clearly you are not informing people that have a legal right to know. And where's the solution of that problem?
So this is precisely what motivates me every single day. Because look, if everybody who needed to know knew and they said, look, Lou, good, yeah, no more, we're good with this, I'd shut up. I'll go work at Walmart tomorrow and hand out stickers. Got no problem doing that. The problem is that's not happening. And people are saying who have a need to know, saying they're not telling us. So we're having to go back channel and getting people who have been part of legacy efforts, people who've been now identifying as whistleblowers, who haven't come out publicly yet, who are already having conversations with Congress. That's why Congress is so pissed off right now. They're like, hey man, we are already being briefed by people in the know. And when they go back to certain elements in the government, they say, I don't know what you're talking about. They say, well, we do. And we've got a problem with this. And this is why you're seeing these hearings very, very publicly now being broadcast, because Congress is pissed. You know, what did Nancy Mace say? Bring it on, right? Whenever during
Come at me,
come
bro.
at me,
yeah,
bro.
come at me, bro.
Can I add context to what you're saying, just to give everybody an example? So David Grush, I think 26th of July 2023, confirmed in front of Congress that, you know, there was reverse engineering programs, and he mentioned non-human biologics as part of that. So previous to that, David spoke to bringing direct employee witnesses to meet in a private skiff. There was a G-lock moment right there.
What's a G-lock moment for?
Jaw opens.
Right, okay.
My world is being rocked. It's not the world I thought it would be. So there's a G-lock moment there. So you've got to ask your question, what's next? If I had all that information and I had subpoena power, why am I not subpoena those hostile witnesses? Not the witnesses that came forward who need to be protected. That's a different conversation. But dragging those hostile witnesses in a church committee and say, hold on a minute. You've got X amount of money. You've got all these programs which are hiding under normal SAPs, which are special access programs. So you're cleverly hiding them in there. So you cannot speak of those other programs that are illegal without giving away information on the non-illegal programs. So why aren't Congress subpoena these people? That needs to happen.
I agree. That's what I said in one of my opening statements. Subpoena hostile witnesses. Go, you have the power, do it. Can you imagine being a member of Congress and hearing from the last Arrow director, not this new one, I'm giving him a chance, but the last guy, Kirkpatrick, where he says, yeah, we didn't talk to anybody, nobody had any information of value. There were members of Congress who literally referred people to Arrow that they had been briefed on, hey, you need to go talk to Arrow because this is important. And then Arrow turned and said, yeah, we never talked to anybody. As a member of Congress, what do you think your reaction is going to be? It's going to be, well, you know, what the hell's going on here, boys? So I'm not surprised at all why Kirkpatrick only, and I hate doing this, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to break my own rule of not talking bad about somebody. I'll do it professionally.
It's about time.
Not personally. I know. There's a reason why Kirkpatrick only lasted a year. Okay,
Right.
Proof is in the pudding. That's all I got to say. If you're so great and hot shit, you know, you made it. Congratulations, barely a year.
Kirkpatrick wrote a report which isn't a report. It's a literature review, and it was a bad one.
That's right.
At his level, a bad one.
And the ambition of that was to
dilute everything down, to make it look
obfuscate.
silly, to make it look stupid. It's a waste of his time.
It was inaccurate. Even Arrow admitted, yeah, it's kind of a crap report. What are you doing sending it to Congress then? I mean, what are we paying you for?
If you sell something with a lack of information, it means that there's no data there. So it's silly. That's the general public. That's what they see. So it's cleverly done. It's what you don't say that matters, not what you do say.
I just wanted to speak to kind of the spectrum of the problem here, right? You have bad actors, and then you have people that are dealing with red tape. Mm-hmm. In Albuquerque, David Marler is just conducting a great effort to establish the National UFO Archives of America, and he's pulling together all of these different witness testimonies and audio recordings and things like that throughout, decades that have been separated and not looked after, and he's trying to get them into one place so that these things can be, archived and researchers can go and look at them. And when I was visiting him, he showed me this, they were like 10 file boxes of just film. And I said to him, I was like, where did you get these? And he said, oh, that's a funny story, actually. The guy that gave them to me was just in an office one day. He was having a meeting with his boss, and the boss was late, so he had a half hour in the waiting room, and he was looking through these boxes that were just stacked in the corner of reception. And he was looking at them, and he was really curious. So when he went into his meeting, he said, what are you doing with those? I'm into UFOs. What are they? And he said, actually, we're running out of space, so we're just going to throw them away, which is insane to think of. But he basically said, if you want them, keep them. And this guy did keep them. So I think that speaks to there's red tape, and there's just everyday, non-malicious, non-intentional kind of obfuscation. But then there's also the other end of the spectrum with Kirkpatrick, where he's stepping outside of his lines as our director to essentially bitch at people on LinkedIn, which isn't okay. That's not an official stance. It's not a reflection of the DOD. We need more professionalism.
Tim
in these
Phillips did
parts.
the same thing, the
He did.
deputy director. And this is literally, I'll share this with you. I don't know if you guys know this. He was reaching out to me, and I was really keeping this down low because I didn't want to burn the guy. But he was reaching out and begging me, come back, and we want to talk to you about more about these UAP, which is funny because according to Kirkpatrick, I never gave him any information, right? So anyways, come back. We want to talk to you. Really sweating me. I'm like, wow, that's weird. He really seemed desperate. Only to find out later he is on LinkedIn talking to people saying, oh, this is a bunch of hooey, bunch of crap, blah, 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 blah. So you are now using a non-official means of communication to a third party about information about government business and giving your opinion about your official position in your official title about government business to a third party who's not even related to Arrow? Wait a minute. So, and now wait, you want me to trust you again? After that, you burn me once, okay, burn me twice, burn me 3 times?
Yeah.
So this is part of the problem. You have these guys running fast and loose. Look, if I had done that shit when I was in the government, I would have been fired and possibly lost my clearance and a bunch of other stuff. You don't do that. And yet these guys somehow get a buy to do that. Yeah, it's okay if you sow dissension and, have these private conversations about your official position to third parties on a non-official platform.
But this is the thing. There almost seems to be a incompetence, a maliciousness that is almost hard to fathom how deep it goes. So then the question always comes, and maybe it's a British thing, we look at it and go, surely if it's that clear and that malicious and that incompetent, surely it's easy to kind of get the mud out of the system. And you're shaking your head there. Do you know, why is it that you guys can all see this? You got
to look at the culture, and you've got to look at the infrastructure of what people are working on. There's so many layers to it. There's so many bureaucracy to it. The culture's fragmented. It's shifted into different spaces. There is a slight change. It's becoming more grassroots. There's younger people moving up through the Air Force who want to know more, etc., etc. But what you're dealing with here is 80 years of just stovepiping and bureaucracy that needs to be completely streamlined. 9/11 was a perfect example of the problem. And 9/11 is a perfect example of where we're at now. Nothing's changed. And everybody's looking after their pension.
Well, I've got 1,000 questions here that you guys wanted to prepare, but I want to go to you, Dan, briefly on this. It might be fair to say, I feel like your research and historical understanding of this topic is quite deep, right? You've spent a lot of time understanding the sort of intricacies and the developments. For people who are listening who may not be aware of, let's say, as close to the line as we can get without stepping over the line, where is the world at when it comes to things that we can now take as being fully 100% true? I look at Grush with the biologics, the crash retrieval stuff. I want to know from you, if you were to try and get us all up to the line, how would you formulate that?
So yeah, we've been going since pretty much Kenneth Arnold's site in 30s, 40s. We're looking at where these incursions were happening. You can even go further back than that into religious texts and things like that. Some people find that waffly, so I'll stay a little away from that. But the modern era begins with Kenneth Arnold's sighting, where he spies these objects over Mount Rainier that he describes as skipping like stones across water, or like a saucer across water, and that's where we get the term flying saucer. That's where it was coined. From there, you get, the 1952 overflight of Washington, D.C., to the people that say, why didn't they land on the White House lawn? They goddamn tried, and we ignored them. And we have the Battle of L.A., where, they're around everywhere. And all through
all
this...
filmed, all documented, all stuff.
All filmed,
people
all
can watch
documented.
their own...
Yep, they appear on radar, and for some reason, these radar tapes are kept from us, and, they don't want to talk about them. And this stuff goes on. You have a Belgian wave. You have school landings in Africa, in Wales, in Australia. It's a global phenomenon, and it's just been going on and on and on. And as the time passes and no one's talking about it, it just raises the questions you're asking, like, why aren't they talking about it? Like, this is overwhelming at this point. When we talk about these things,
it's almost like someone trying to convince like the world's flat. It's like you can't.
Yeah.
At some point you've got to go. There's such overwhelming evidence that this is an incorrect proposition.
Yeah.
So you have to just break the glass and just deal with it. So this is part of my concern. I'm worried if it's getting this historically based. There's so much evidence. There's videos, and they're all compounding and compounding and compounding. Where's it getting to here?
Yeah, and whoever the secret keepers are, whether it's incompetence, whether it's maliciousness, whatever it is, they seem afraid to just say, you know what, we don't know. We can't secure your skies. We can't look after you when you're in your house and your door's locked. They don't want people to say that. So you get these investigations since the 50s, like Project Sign, Grudge, Blue Book, where it seems that the modus operandi of those investigations is to explain these things away, to make people feel safe at night, to be able to go to sleep and not worry about their kids, and to know that the world's going to be there in the morning, instead of just kind of leveling with people and going, you know what, there are things we don't know about. And that's not a revelation to most people, right? Like, we look out into the universe and it's infinite. Like, 95% of the universe is made of dark matter and dark energy, and that's just kind of a placeholder for things we don't know. So saying I don't know is okay. But for some reason, the defense intelligence apparatus seem incapable of saying, we don't know.
Can I hop on that for? That's a very good point. It's very relevant because governments, religions, and institutions are solution-focused. This all works because there's a social contract between individuals that agree that governments have authority, that governments have preeminence. Governments and religions have, they have the ability to decree and dictate on behalf of whether they're followers or their citizens and whatnot. But the truth is, society's held together by a thread, and it can break down very quickly. So it's not in the best interest of any government or body that has some sort of perceived authority to present a problem for which there's no solution. And I've used this example over and over again. I'll give you a real case example. When the United States and Soviet Union were in the middle of the Cold War, we had this treaty where we were not going to fly manned reconnaissance missions over each other's country. So what did the CIA do? Well, they developed the U-2 plane with Lockheed Skunk Works to do exactly that. And we were going to build a plane that flew higher and faster than any other aircraft, and hopefully the Russians wouldn't notice. And for the first couple missions, guess what? We were right. The Russians didn't react. Our plane worked. It is flying faster than and higher than anything else, and the Russians don't see it on radar. That wasn't until the Russians developed the SA-2 surface-to-air missile, successfully shot down a U-2, and then paraded Powers, the pilot, and wreckage of the aircraft in front of the world and even in front of the United Nations. In fact, Russia didn't even admit to their own citizens that they were tracking every single flight until they had a capability to neutralize it. Right? So it's not uncommon for a country to avoid a conversation for which there is no solution, until which point there is a solution. And the United States is no different.
Well, I think an important point to make is where we're talking about secrecy classification. A couple of days after the recent House hearing, Representative Mace, she was handed a pile of declassified documents, which she spent a weekend going through, where this is information that is in the public domain and has been for a very long time. People can go and look at documents where you have high-ranking military officials with back and forths talking about UFOs, UAP. And I think another point, UAP is the acronym that we hear and use a lot nowadays. That was used back in the 50s as well. It's not a new thing. It's just been reintroduced to remove the stigma and taboo. So anyone out there that says, show me the data, show me the evidence, you can go online in your house and look it up yourself, and it's right there.
Can you unpack a bit about what do you mean by the documents that?
So FBI documents, Navy documents, many military branches and agencies have declassified documents available in their online reading rooms.
Discussing this topic, and they handed it to the people at Congress. Is that what you're saying? That
somebody had provided Nancy Mace with these documents just to bring her a bit more up to speed.
Understood.
Because she's obviously very engaged in this subject now, and like a lot of people, wants to learn more. So
there's this misnomer that there's not enough information in the public domain, when in reality, Vinny's right. There's been so much released by the CIA and the FBI. You can go back decades where there are actual memorandums from the director of the CIA, from the director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover himself, where the subject line is flying saucers. What do we do about this?
That's like what you brought up in Rogan, the documents where you look all the way back and you see those.
Right. So now Congress is aware of this. And so when people like an Arrow is saying, well, we have no historical information, what do you mean you don't have this? There's thousands and thousands of pages. Are you not even doing your due diligence, looking at what's already been released by the U.S. government?
And in those documents as well, you can see that throughout the history of the US's study on it, there are scientists that were engaged in things like Project Conan and the Conan reports and things like that, where when the scientists came to the conclusion this wasn't based from Earth, this wasn't anything that we know, they thought it was extraterrestrial, they were thrown off the projects. And those, the workings in the paper were kind of covered up.
But this comes back to this question about how far to the line can we get? Like, how do you know that it's not non-human origin? In all of your experience, your historical understanding, where we're at now, what is it that gives you confidence to say that these aren't human?
So, I mean, there are a lot of ways. We're kind of getting into origin. You know, in certain documents, these were referred to as technology of unknown origin. And there are so many different ideas and solutions for what these could be. So basically, kind of cliff notes, is if we're going back to the 40s and 30s and we're talking about craft that can travel at supersonic speeds, be, using low observability and all of these 5-6 observables.
I can give an example of that if you want from the 50s.
Yeah, go
1956, over RAF Lakenheath and Bentwaters here in the UK, we had military personnel on base. It was nighttime. They were tracking on radar objects coming from mainland Europe at multiples of thousands of miles per hour on radar. They sent up fighter jets to try and intercept these things that were the pilots and the ground were seeing were not something recognizable. They were in front of the plane. They were whipping behind the plane just in instantaneous. So you've got witness testimony. You've got radar data. This is a U.S. Air Force joint base here in the UK. So you have documents from the United States side of things. It was part of Project Blue Book, but it was in the 700 plus cases that they could not figure out. Because they did thousands. Oh, yeah, we can answer all of these away as this, and this, and this, prosaic. They didn't talk about these 700 cases that they couldn't resolve. But now we have it from the UK side as well. We have documents in the National Archives here. So we can pull all of this information into a case from 1956 of objects doing incredible maneuvers with witnesses, etc. What is that?
Well, also what freaked me out a bit, again, coming from more of a layman perspective, I guess, is when we did Rogan and you brought up those documents from like the 1950s, and you can see the descriptions. They're very oldie time descriptions, like, oh, it felt like a silver propane tank or something like that. And you go, oh, that's a weird way of describing something. And then you rock up to Fravor's 2004 Nimitz incident, and you're like, it's a bit weird, isn't it? Like, it's a bit strange that they have such similar fingerprints of testimony. So I guess it's really hard to imagine that this is something that's an adversary developed nearly 100 years ago that was doing these maneuvers. So I kind of get where you're at.
Yeah, and you opened up that you're a skeptic. I'm a skeptic. Every one of us here is a skeptic. I come from a science background. We have a friend over there that has a PhD. We're all skeptics. We have to chase the data. There's a difference between evidence and proof. And there's a hierarchy of evidence. And debunkers are there. No, we don't have enough evidence. We don't have proof. There's a difference between the two, and there's a hierarchy. We have anecdotal. We have expert anecdotal evidence. We've got data from FLIR. We've got data from spy radar. I'm sure that we have particular data from satellites. Particular profiling of these particular objects that is very, very sensitive in terms of the signatures that they give. It's there. Yes, it's classified, and fair enough, that's fine. But it's there. But it's culminating, and it's growing to a point where it's going to, as Lou said, it's going to stink out the fridge. So we need to kind of get to that point where we need to have a healthy understanding of what a skeptic is, because a skeptic chases the data, and we need to start chasing that data. But we don't really have internationally, Beatrice said this a while ago on a call with her, that we don't have a centralized point where all these scientists can come together and create a story in a report. Everybody's siloed, they're all doing their little stories, but nobody's coming together, in a committee where they're bringing this all together and they're presenting it. And I think that we need that. And I think that needs to be filtered down into STEM research into the future.
Yeah, and you talk about skeptic. Let's look on the other side of things when people throw around the word, you're a believer. I believe something is going on that warrants investigation and looking into by science, academia, and more. It's easy for people to say you blindly believe. No, I've spoken to enough people and there's enough evidence, like we talked about the declassified documents. There's enough stuff there that this, I believe, is important.
Carl Sagan said, extraordinary beliefs require extraordinary evidence. What he also said was absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Mm-hmm. So we need to follow the data. And that line, extraordinary beliefs, is kind of touted by debunkers everywhere. Yet they leave that one about evidence out, about following the data. And we also touched on something important there, which is cultural windows on the world, like relative, how we look at the world. How people in South America look at lights in the sky is different from how we look at lights in the sky. We see UFOs, right? But as you said, going back to the 50s, they don't see Tic Tacs, they see propane tanks. Go back even further, and they talk about these things like they're dragons in the sky. And people can call it nonsense all they want, but these guys were farmers, and they set their clocks by the dragons in the sky, and they grew their crops by that, and they lived by that, and they did live by that, and they flourished.
Dan, can I ask you a question? And feel free to be clever in not answering it specifically. But from my understanding, there's some, and actually, Rob, this may be something as well for you. There's some cultural significance to this topic of UAP. I've talked to some Aboriginal and Indigenous people in South America about what these things mean to them. And to them, there's more of a spiritual connection, some sort of, could be a potential bad omen of something to come, or maybe a spiritual representation of an ancestor, or maybe even a harbinger of something to come, or something that hasn't passed yet. You had shared an interesting story. To the degree you're comfortable with sharing with an individual from Scandinavia, do you mind sharing that with us?
Yeah, of course. So just to be accurate, it was Sweden. Okay. And these guys, they messaged me through a friend, and they messaged me because they listened to the podcast and wanted to get this video out that they filmed of an orb to someone reputable who would respectfully look at it and not just phooey it right away. And this guy and his girlfriend doesn't want to talk to me about it on the phone. Like, I've tried, and I've been sensitive and respectful, in their approach. And I've come to understand the why of why they don't want to talk about it. Now, the video, which I can give you, so you can cut into this however you want. It won't do well to just hold it up to the camera right now. But the couple were in the kitchen. They saw an orb start tracing the property line. They turned the external security camera on and caught this footage of it. And then from the kitchen, out the kitchen window, they shone a torch at it. And the orb cast a shadow behind it. It's not casting any light into the environment. And we hear about these things all the time, but we don't see videos of them. And we all think, oh, well, if you see something weird, you're going to put it on Facebook, right? You're going to put it on Twitter, and you're going to get out into the world because, you want the attention, right? And that's not true. Not everyone approaches it this way. And through talking to the couple, I came to understand that the reason that they didn't want this out there was because it spooked them out for very personal reasons. In Sweden, they talk about these things called corpse lights, and they're thought to be harbingers of a death in the close family. Now, a week after these guys saw the orb, the girlfriend's father passed away. So it hit really close to home, really personally, and it just freaked them out totally. So they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to come forward. And it's not because of stigma. It's not because they're being covered up. It's for very deeply held personal reasons. And then you can look at, Vinnie and I went to South America, to Colombia, to research the dancing lights of La Peña de Huayca, they were called. And these lights, again, weren't called UFOs. They were called ancestor lights. And these lights occurred at the top of a sheer cliff drop where the last 400 of the Muisca tribe were forced by the Spanish conquistadors to walk off the edge of this cliff. And when the locals encounter these lights, they don't go right into the newspaper about UFOs. They sit and they hold it peacefully, thinking that they've just contacted their ancestors and their family. And it's really personal and it's really touching to them. So they're reacting in a different way. And I think it speaks to this need for almost like a central clearinghouse, a worldwide Manhattan Project, where people who understand the cultural differences and the cultural relative, windows on reality can come together and talk about these things and find the overlap and the common language that we're really lacking right now.
This fascinates me. When you went, did you see the lights yourself?
I did.
So Vinnie did. Yeah. And again, we've got the footage, so I can give you the footage to show, and it's incredible.
And for example, these orbs, and obviously people will look at these videos themselves and they'll do their research and make their own mind. There's something, obviously, for someone who's seen it, it's very convincing to you that this is a peculiar... kind of intelligently moving. How far away is it? Is it
so
big?
I'll let Vinnie describe the light, and afterwards I'll tell you how we try to recreate
the lights have been reported as like plasma. The light is very bright, but it's very internal. It doesn't give off a big beam of light like you would think a high-powered torch.
So it's not like diffusing
no,
light.
not
It's
at
like
all.
almost like an energy ball.
It's big as well.
Right.
If we tried to we actually went back the next year to try and recreate what we filmed and saw, with really high lumen torches, with thermal drones, just to try and really map the area of the land to see what we could do. We didn't even come close to recreating it. And, even if this turns out to be something Earth-based, like a rare sort of Earth light based on the geography and the area, it's still something super rare that we don't fully understand that could potentially be tapped into for some purpose.
Well, I mean, my kind of science brain kicks off and you bring up this important word about belief, because you could say, oh, well, do you believe or do you not believe? It's like, well, you don't believe in like maths or Pythagoras theorem. That's just an observation where you go, well, this is a thing and we observe it. Now, do I believe it came from somewhere? Maybe that's a conversation. But if you're saying that we're at the point now where the line is getting so close where statements are being declassified by the Pentagon, where in the civilian aviation domain and the professional aviation domain, we're getting footage of things apparently coming right down on runways. What I'm kind of interested is, I know we could all talk about this forever, and I love this conversation. It's been so good. What I want to start to steer towards amongst all of you, and as much as I can pick your brains, where do you think this is going? What do you think the next steps look like into getting these declassification processes underway? I would love to hear about what you think comes next from this point forward.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to that, because I want to highlight again the work that Lou's been doing, both in his professional career, but then since he left as well, and bringing this to Congress, talking about it publicly, and I think that's huge. We need more of that, because we have Congress on board now, and that is the official route that we can really go down. Because if Congress don't do this, what's to say that an adversary will do this? China might just suddenly disclose. Russia might disclose. We want this done the right way. It has to be done the right way. But at the same time, if there is a non-human intelligence, they could just suddenly turn up one day and say, here you go, here we are.
Yeah,
There's
that's
so
the interesting
many
facet.
ways that it can happen.
When we look out at our world and we think about what's out there that we don't understand, we start bumping up against the fact, there was an interesting point in the hearing where I think it was Mace who said to you, what is life? And everyone kind of defined life, and Mike Gold had this really cool answer, and yours was very scientific, and you said that it's something that reacts to a stimulus. And I don't really think people understand that each kind of facet of science, biology, chemistry, physics, they all have their different ideas of life. And this kind of has already been something that science has bumped up against when we look at the mission that went to Mars, kind of, we're talking 70s, 80s. And a bunch of scientists thought that they found a sample of biological life.
That's right.
But they couldn't confirm it. And people think it's a conspiracy theory, but it turns out that the test that we put together to test that sample might have killed what we found.
That's right.
And we've never sent anything back because we don't know how to define life itself. And we look under the ice and we find extremophiles. We look into the earth and think nothing can survive here. Yet there they are. There's bacteria. Everywhere we look, there is life. And we have a really narrow band of what that is. And it kind of begs the question, if we saw an extraterrestrial life that wasn't what we see as life on Earth, would we even know? How weird could it be?
Would we recognize it?
We wouldn't recognize it at all. We could pass each other by like ships in the night and not even recognize it.
Well, I'm going to get a video up of that kind of weird, like, finger-like thing in the sky. Have you seen that? I mean, you've only got... it's got to be maybe VFX or someone's playing a trick or whatever, but some of those videos where you go, is this some, like, interdimensionally augmenting craft that is barely scathing through our 3 or 4 dimensions? Do you know what I mean? You've seen these videos of these really weird craft. And I guess, further to your point, though, where do you see the next couple of years landing with this topic in your position, in your research? What do you think's coming up on the horizon?
So I think there's going to be not only a reckoning with, as I said, how we define life, but also that's going to kind of turn the mirror on us in terms of thinking about how we treat animals on this planet, how we think of, how we look to an outsider. Because there's every notion to think that if ET showed up and they're looking down at our planet, not only will they see it as like wholly a battlefield based on how we treat each other as humans, but also we're technically committing genocide against so many species, and we don't even recognize their awareness. The Romans thought that animals were just like rocks, that they didn't have an awareness, and yet now, if you've got a dog, a cat, we think of it differently. We think of them as having an internal life, and we're kind of creeping towards this precipice where we have kind of a scale of intelligence. You can have stupid people and you can have really intelligent people. And yet we think being aware is a 1 or a 0. Yeah. When really there's probably a scale of awareness as well. Like, how aware is something? I read something the other day about there was a scientist who was studying spiders, and he watched a spider build a web in front of his security light, make a really thick strand of webbing to the security light that it was plucking every time the light went off so it could attract prey. How is that not aware? That's just as smart as the kind of thing that we would do, building bear traps and so on and so forth. So if we start looking at our planet and realizing that, we kind of can grok our position as caretakers a bit more. And to talk about ourselves as caretakers more is to kind of get into the area of what indigenous peoples in America and all over the world think of humans as, that this is a garden and we are privileged to be here and we have to look after it. And that's tantalizing because it plugs into so many messages that our neighbors from out of town kind of have given people, when they've done school landings and things like that. They all tell us, look after your environment. Don't get too technologized was the word. Don't get away from
and
what
these
makes
are
you
testimonies,
human.
I guess, to be clear for people listening that might not be aware, these are testimonies of children who have had almost telepathic encounters with these beings that have tried to teach them lessons, right? And to try and make them kind of more aware of the earth and the fragility of life, which is quite hard to believe in many respects. It's quite hard to believe that happens and you can speak to them as adults now and that they're on camera. And I've got to move over to you as well, Rob. Like, what are your thoughts about where we go from here? Like, what's the future feeling like for you as you look at this topic?
I look at the past and I look at our behaviours in the past. You look at the Industrial Revolution, you look at the Renaissance. I think we're reaching an inflection point, change in culture, and change of how we view things. But I think there's different mechanisms to that. I see a change in the change in process in terms of, let's just say America as an example, how things can shift in terms of classification guides, all that type of stuff. I think there's a huge overhaul there that needs to be done. A huge shift in culture that needs to be done across all the different agencies. I also think that at some point we will permit, and I say that not very lightly, permit key people who can literally hand this evidence to the public and say this exists. And at some point we will have the proof that it exists, because there's a difference between evidence and proof, and I think we will get to that. But it's a race. It's a race, like Vinnie said. Who's going to get there first? Is it going to be the United States? Is the United States going to shoot itself in the foot by its very own mechanism to protect itself? Or is it going to be Australia? Is it going to be one of the Five Eyes countries? I don't know, but there's definitely going to be a shift. There's going to be a paradigm shift. And I think we're going to have to cross the chasm, but I think it's going to have to happen slowly. Because we have to look at how cultures behave, how cultures embrace, and change is difficult for the human. It really is.
What about you, Vinnie?
Yeah, I mean, there are, like, I think just on my previous point, there are many channels that we can do this by. I think one thing that encourages me outside of government is a lot of civilian institutions now are coming forward to really help move this topic along as well. I think, and again, academia and science are now a lot more involved. And these are the things, as someone who's been in this subject for a long time, that we've been crying out for. And you know, the mainstream media, okay, they're picking it up a bit now, but I think legacy media has had its day. We see great independent journalists now. Christopher Sharp being over the other side of the room. Just a case in point is that everything's in place now for this information to come out from different areas. And I think, like Rob says, if it's done in a controlled, measured way, we can get through it and learn from it and grow from it. And I think it has to happen. I really do. I think it will.
Take it, Whaley.
Well, this whole conversation has been about the possibility of life beyond our current understanding. And my thoughts are this. All life is valuable, but sentience is invaluable, meaning that is truly special. All life is special, but when you have life that can recognize other life as being life, that's truly precious indeed. And if what we are dealing with are not automatons, as the ancient Greeks and others have described, and other scientists, but are truly sentient, we have a much bigger obligation and responsibility on our hands right now. Okay, because we're not dealing with a plant that's controlling something. We're dealing with something that recognizes the intrinsic value of what it means to be alive, and may recognize us and our sentience as well. That's profound, because right now on this planet we have cats and dogs and other domesticated animals that we share some form of sentience with. In fact, we give them human names and we talk to them like children, because we recognize that they see us and we see them. If what we are dealing with truly is sentience, non-human sentience, then we've just started the conversation.
And on that note, I can't tell you how special this has been. Thank you very much, Vinnie. I appreciate you. This has been great. Lou, as always, this has been great. We're going to do this again next year. We'll see where we're at with disclosure. And what a note to finish on. I have to say thank you to everyone and the team and all of you legendary people that have come along for the ride with us. This has been really special. As we continue this conversation and as we get more steps upwards on that ladder, we will see you when I see you next time.
I wish we could turn the camera so they could see who's sitting back here.
We can try.
But incredible. It's been a true honor and privilege.
Awesome.